Welcome back to Holly and the Home Medic. You're still Holly.
I am, every time.
You will
It's the darndest thing.
You will always be Holly. So, you don't even know what we're talking about yet, but you are completely and fully prepared because you're still you.
I am.
And what I wanted to talk about today is water stuff. Water softeners, water purifiers, water heaters, if we can get to it. We're going to cover those sorts of things. We're
You're right, I know nothing about any of those.
So I got a call from a good friend. She's almost as awesome as you are.
So close.
Yeah, it's sometimes you just can't quite make that bar.
It's a high bar to reach, to be fair.
But she called me up and she says, I heard this weirdest noise in the middle of the night as I was down in my basement and I couldn't figure out what it was. And she actually has Verbo renters down in her basement.
Verbo renters?
VRBO, vacation rentals by owner. It's like
Oh,
Airbnb.
okay, like the Airbnb. Okay, yeah. Okay, continue.
And so she says, I got this horrible noise going on down there. And she wanted to know what was going on. She finally figured out that it was the water softener. But the water softener, she hadn't stocked that thing with salt in years. And basically what was happening with this one, water softeners are a little bit noisy, but they're not a lot noisy unless they're going out.
Okay.
And she was used to having basically unsoftened water anyway, because if there's no salt, then the water doesn't get conditioned.
Right. And it doesn't feel nice, and in my opinion, feels like the soap never fully washes off.
Right. So she's going like, well, she doesn't have a lot of money. She doesn't have any extra money.
Fair.
This is one of the reasons why we're doing Verbo.
Okay.
And so she's going, well, I guess I need to get salt into that. And I said, no, you don't. The reason for this is because she was used, water softeners, most of the time they soften water. Mm-hmm. If they don't work, then the water goes unsoftened, and that's what she was used to, and that's what she was fine with.
Right.
So for her, she didn't need to go buy salt because that would cause a condition that she didn't necessarily want, never needed, never used. It wasn't on her priority list.
Right. That's why I know nothing about water softeners. I've never had one. So she and I are in the same boat here. This has never been something that was a financial priority for me.
One of us. So I have a story or two.
Don't we always?
So I used to work back in a previous life at the state government division of drinking water.
Okay.
And so you get those door-to-door salesmen who come by, and part of their standard presentation is those state guys are liars, cheaters, and evil, and they're trying to screw you. So this guy, as part of his presentation, he had a couple of pages that was about don't trust any of the water people. Mm-hmm. And
of which you were one.
I knew that was in there because I'd listened to that same presentation a year before, but this time he asked what I did, so he kind of smiled and he kind of turned past a couple of pages without saying anything. I think I also smiled because I knew what he was turning past. But his thing was that water softening purifies your water. And it doesn't.
Those are different things.
Yes. See, you're more up to speed than you thought you were.
Do you know how I knew? Because it's called a water softener and not a water purifier, and we all know names are never wrong.
So basically, what a water softener does, there's sections and parts of this water softener. There's your brine barrel, also known as your salt barrel.
Okay.
And that should have, let's say, 6 to 8 inches of water in the bottom.
Okay.
And I guess we'll come back to that. Then there's also your resin barrel, and it has little resin beads in there, and you can't get into those because if you have a 3-year-old, the 3-year-old gets into the resin beads, and then we have a problem throughout the house.
Okay.
So you will never see those resin beads.
And if you ever do, you talk to your 3-year-old.
Yeah, it's her fault.
They're probably the ones that could figure out how to get in there in the first place. Mine could.
And then you have the brains to the whole system. And what the brains are going to do is they're going to, it'll be a mixture of whatever whatever level of programming you're going to get. Sometimes they just measure the amount of water coming through and they say, okay, we're going to recycle the water after, let's say, 1,000 or 10,000 gallons comes through because we're trying to refresh the resin beads.
Okay.
Let me go back to the resin beads.
Yeah, that doesn't make... I'm still... Anyway, continue.
So what happens is the resin beads start off clean.
Okay.
And then here comes the hard water through your system.
Okay.
The resin beads attract the hardness. The hardness is calcium and magnesium.
That makes more sense. Like
Okay.
Water isn't hard, that's why it's a liquid. That's why it's water.
How hard is water? So now the question is how hard is water, and that can change. And the measure of hardness is going to be how much calcium and magnesium do you have.
Which just comes from nutrients,
You just
whatever, in
stuff in the soil.
wherever it comes from, the tap, yada yada, anything that's leached through the pipes. Or there's not
Basically,
usually-
let's say that the water lands on the mountain. I'm seeing a mountain. here.
Okay.
And it leaches down through the soil, and 10 million years later, it either gets pumped out of the ground,
Okay,
or
so
there's
some
a
river.
spring, or there's a river, or whatever the water source is. But in the
creek.
meantime, it has soaked up some of the calcium and magnesium and other things. In this case, we're just focusing on the hardness, calcium and magnesium. And so now it's got that among whatever else it's got.
Okay.
And it comes into your home. It gets into the city, gets delivered to your house, and goes through your water main. And now it's hitting your water softener.
Okay.
So now these resin beads say, I want that hardness more than the water wants the hardness.
Okay.
So the resin beads say, give me all your hardness.
So then the water is all the calcium and magnesium is filtered through the resin beads and then comes out the other side to do what?
To be unhardened.
To be beautiful soft water.
Beautiful soft
Some
water.
of us can't afford.
True. True. So now we have softened water, but there comes a point at which the resin beads can no longer attract any more
It's like
hardness.
a sponge that has soaked up too much water and
Right.
it's not going to soak anymore. It needs somehow to
Exactly.
get rid of it, and then
So now what happens is the brains
okay.
say, let's recycle. Let's start this whole cycle over again.
Okay.
And so they're going to say, all right, now we have dirty beads. We want clean beads. So what we're going to do is we're going to flush a whole bunch of sodium past the beads, and we're going to wash all the calcium off, and we're going to replace it with sodium.
Okay.
Sodium comes from sodium chloride, also known as
Salt.
salt.
I'm so smart.
Aren't you good?
I'm basically a genius. Super close. Okay, now wait a minute. Where
Okay.
does all the calcium and magnesium go?
The calcium and magnesium gets wasted, and it gets drained into the drain that should be somewhere very close to your water softener.
Doesn't that in theory go back to the earth and then
It kind of does. So, there are plenty, the calcium and magnesium isn't going to be hard on planet Earth, but there's a lot of salt associated with this process, sodium and chlorine. And that is not good for planet Earth.
that actually makes sense. This is actually something very, very similar to what my mom just told me the other day. She was saying she was trying to get some seeds to start her garden, and she said something along the lines of, my garden didn't work last year, and I finally had someone mention to me that perhaps the water I was using was house water and was getting affected by our water softener. So we were essentially watering the plants with salt water.
Right. That's
And
exactly it.
She's suspecting that that was the reason her garden didn't thrive. And as soon as she said that, I was like, yeah, that totally makes sense. Because plants like that, seaweed is different.
Mm-hmm.
They like salt. But basically any other plant, they don't like salt as much as seaweed does.
You're salting up your garden.
Yeah.
So,
Which the whole point of having fresh fruits and vegetables is to avoid salt, right? Until you cook it and then you need it because it tastes better and then...
yeah, so human beings and real beings, they
Legumes.
both, they, you know that word, I
That's so smart.
they like calcium. They need calcium. Women take calcium pills. None of us
some of
need extra sodium in our diets.
True.
We get plenty of that anyway. And then if you're me, sodium causes high blood pressure. So sodium is not a good thing in your system, but it does make cleaning the sink easier.
Okay, so then let me ask a question. Is there a point when that sodium ends up not staying in the water softener and ends up in your household water?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So now what we're getting after we've done a water softener
Thingy.
cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, a thingy.
Yes, it's a real
After
term.
we've done one of those thingies.
Yep.
Now we have, we've cleaned off the beads, etc. And now we've got salt flowing through the system. That's great. Makes the sinks easier to clean. It makes the showers easier to clean. I'm not going to argue that the water softener salesman will tell you that it makes your clothes last longer, and it probably makes your water heater last longer.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, if you think about it from that perspective, yes, taking out some of the things that make water harder and leave more residue, if you will, it makes sense. It would make clothing and machinery like water heaters and stuff. That makes sense that it would make it last longer. But
I could hear
that
it
was
coming.
hanging, yes. but at what cost?
So, and that's kind of the thing. So, granted that the water heater will last longer, the clothes will last longer, but how much money are you putting into salt? And could you have just gone and bought other clothes and been ahead?
Well, and another thing that made me think of, you said something about like 1,000 or 10,000 gallons or whatever. You think about 10,000 gallons of water and you're like, holy cow, I wouldn't go through that in 10 years. Yes, you would. You would go through that a lot faster than you think.
So the average household, and I still don't know how they figure this, but they figure on 400 gallons per person per day.
400 gallons that they go through?
Right.
That's sad.
And we all go, no, I would never go through that. But cities will tell you that's about right. So now we have this softened water throughout the house, which is,
It's
again,
10,000 gallons. It's going through a lot in a day, especially if you have a family of like 6 or something. Then all of a sudden, you've got a water softener kicking on several times throughout the day.
This goes back to the brains. Now, the brains are either going to measure time or they're going to measure gallons.
Okay.
So if it's measuring time, it'll say, okay, every 2 nights at 2 a.m., I'm going to recharge the system.
Okay.
Or it can be every 3 nights.
Right.
And you, the homeowner, of course, can program that.
Right.
You want it to happen during the night because you don't want to be using your water and having it be cycled at the same time. That's wrong.
Makes sense.
So yeah, now we've got the brains that I've poorly described, and the resin that I've poorly described, and your salt barrel that I've poorly described.
Okay.
And that's the system.
That makes sense to me, and I know nothing about, knew nothing about water softeners. Now I'm basically a professional. I can go fix them now.
That's right. So now here's what you need to consider. The sodium isn't good for you, and it's not good for the plants. So there's a couple things we want to do when we have a water softener system installed.
Okay.
We want to have the kitchen cold be unsoftened.
Oh, that makes sense. It's your drinking water, usually.
Right. If you've got a drinking fountain, those are awesome.
Some of us don't have those in our homes either.
It needs to be unsoftened.
Oh, and like those little, the little purifier thingies that attach to your sink. That's like the little, bloop, next to the faucet. You'd want that unsoftened, I'm assuming.
What'd you call that again?
A little purifier thing, but I went bloop.
That's what it was. Now, this is totally different than a water purification system.
Yes, you want that on all of your water.
Yeah, we'll talk about that separately. But also, you don't want to be softening your hose bib water.
I'm assuming that's the stuff you water plants with.
Right.
Hose, yes, that would be the problem that my mother had.
So
if you want to waste your garden, by all means, have it be softened.
Yeah, so we're paying money to destroy our crops and basically get salt all over them. And we're wasting water to boot. And we're hijacking the system. So if it's expecting to cycle, I don't know, let's say every 1,000 gallons, and you put 2,000 gallons of water on your peas and potatoes, now for whatever the time period that remains, you're going with unsoftened water because you've used up the entire capacity to soften.
So you don't get to enjoy the benefits of the water softener because...
Yeah, you've just salted your potatoes is all.
Which is fine after they're cooked. Try not to do it when they're still growing.
Pre-salted peas and potatoes. You know,
Which would, granted, it's very convenient. It'd be nice if they had a little pepper hose too, but like, you know, until that point.
If only it didn't cause them to die. So let's go back to my friend. I went over to her home and I was like, well, you're not used to having softened water. All you're getting is loud sounds and water waste at this point.
Okay.
So,
neither of which I would want or need.
So I basically, I took the water softener system out of service. I gave her what she had already had and was
Familiar
fine with.
yeah.
And I didn't see a power button on the brains, so I pulled the plug.
Okay.
And that wasn't quite enough. That might be where the story would end for somebody else. But here's my little brain. My little brain is saying, okay, if we just pull the plug, we are still running water into the brine or into the resin tank. And
but with no brain to tell it what to do.
Yeah, and it doesn't ever get cycled, and it becomes swamp water in there.
Ew, gross.
And I could tell you stories about what gets into drinking water systems, but that's swamp water, and maybe you like swamp water. Yeah, think mouse tails and
Ew.
yeah, and these sorts of things. So what I did is, and a lot of these water softener systems will have it. They'll have 3 valves. One valve that controls the water going in, one that controls the water going out, and another that it's kind of a dual system where it either goes to A or B. B is the water softener. A is go around the water softener.
Okay. Which is where you would want your cold water to be, right?
Right.
Right, okay.
So what I did is I turned those 3 valves, and I turned the 2 valves that were associated with the water softener off, and I turned valve A on that goes the water around the water softener. So now we don't get a swamp in there.
Okay, because there's really no reason for it to be going in there because it's not doing anything. It's not working anyway.
Right. Yeah, and we don't need the
So
swamp.
now you're just making sure all of the water goes around as opposed to some of it or none of it.
Right.
So the water heater is essentially a very lovely decoration at this point.
Right. It's a big paperweight, but it's still a big paperweight that could become a swamp, and we don't need the swamp.
Right.
So.
And then you leave it there in case future homeowners decide they
Right.
want it. Okay.
Yeah. So I left it there. It wasn't my house anyway, and. I talked to her husband. He was around the corner, and I said I turned it off. And he said, well, I didn't see how you did that, but we're not ever going to deal with it anyway. So
Right.
now
Wait,
let's
why?
say that you decided you wanted to consider buying a water softener.
Okay.
You would do that if you wanted your water heater to last longer, you wanted your clothes to last longer, and you wanted to make it easier for you to clean the sinks and showers.
Those all actually sound really nice.
They do. And it's very
Not gonna
easy
lie.
to sell that. You would decide against that if it was more important for you to not drag in 50-pound bags of salt all the time and pay for those. I think back in the day, I was putting $30 per month into salt. And then the question is, that's $360 a month or a year, and
You could buy a lot of clothes for $300.
yeah, you can.
And you could repair your water hunter. What water hunter?
Your
That's
water
a separate
hunter.
thing. Water heater.
Yeah, the water heater is going to be about $700-800. So
Well, I mean, you figure for 2 years, you really hope your water heater lasts more than 2 years.
right.
If it doesn't, you may want to consider a different brand.
Now, let me throw one more kink in the works. They've come up with basically a lemon juice or a citrus material, and you can go that direction. That's awesome because
Citrus material for
instead of the salt.
instead of the salt. Oh,
Right.
okay.
So that's beautiful because now if we're discharging a whole bunch of citrus into the soil, we're not killing it. Oh, you still can't grow tomatoes. But
Okay.
we're not destroying Mother Earth with citrus materials where we are with salt.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So it's not necessarily great for gardening, again, but at least it won't damage anything. So if it gets, like, if the valve or whatever ends up on your grass, it's not going to kill your grass.
Right. Yeah. Not as bad.
Not as much. It'll be like a yellow-green instead of like a brown.
So now you tell me, you are that person. You are an entire demographic. You are 3 million people. At what point in your life do you believe that you personally are going to start thinking about a water softener?
If money were not an object.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be nice. Like, let's be honest. I've scrubbed out showers. That kind of sucks. And you know, like the little spots that end up like on your dishes and your dishwasher and things like that. Like, they're annoying. Let's be real, they're annoying. If I didn't ever have to worry about the cost, and if somebody were to come in and deliver the salt for me, and I never had to do that, and if I knew that there was absolutely no way it would ever hurt the earth, then I would do it. So you have to all of a sudden take away all the things that it is.
Yeah.
It's expensive, inconvenient, and hurts the earth. So if you take all those away, I would love a water softener.
That was a good summary. You know, I have also seen where they have crawl spaces, for example, where some poor dude, I hope it's not his wife, has to crawl in, dragging bags of salt behind them, and then you can't kneel high enough to kneel all the way up in the crawl space. So you end up doing it with your back. And
my husband's a chiropractor. That is a terrible idea.
Yeah, not a good idea. So don't do that.
Nope. Check that off your list. Don't do that.
As another final tip, you know, it's good to actually put your brine barrel in the garage so that you don't have to lug it up and down the stairs. And then you can have your resin tank wherever you put it. Maybe you can put it in the garage too, or maybe you can put it in the furnace room. They don't have to be together.
Okay.
So, thank you very much, Holly.
You're welcome.
Do you feel like knowledgeable?
I do, and I actually, I'm not trying to say water softeners are bad. I'm actually kind of glad that I don't have one. I always kind of wanted one because it made me think of like, well, some people have water softeners. Like, rich people have water softeners. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. So now I'm starting to think I'm okay with that one. So I'm good.
Okay. Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power.
Now you feel powerful. Next time somebody says, well, I have a water softener.
I'll be like,
system.
That's nice for you. I hope you enjoy killing the earth.
Thank you very much, Holly.
You're welcome.